Everybody, HBCU game day. I am sitting on a red couch, but this is not that show, the red couch show. I don't even know what it's officially called. This is HBCU Conversations. Joining us now, our contributor and friend, Dr. Kenyatta Cavil from inside the HBCU Sports Lab in Houston, Texas. Doc, I had to get on with you today because since yesterday, last 2 days have almost been like an early D-Day for HBCU college football coming up this fall. We've had some cancellations. It all kind of started with Tennessee State. We heard rumblings that FAMU and Southern's game was going to be called off. That was called off. GHO's homecoming, North Carolina A&T's homecoming festivities called off along with Winston-Salem State. And we're just going to hear more and more of these as the days go by and weeks become heading into the fall, I'm for sure. We always love to talk business with you. First question, were you surprised to see these cancellations starts to trickle in with HBCU football?
No, on this one, I was not surprised. Unlike the announcement of FAMU, even though we heard things were running in regards to FAMU looking to analyze their position in the MEAC and ultimately decide to go to SWAC. These cancellations were things that I knew were inevitable in terms of just looking at the financial disposition of any programs that are below the Power 5 conferences. I believe that you will see this trend continue at various levels where for HBCU, homecomings will be canceled. And ultimately, the last decision we made is about the football season. And I'm probably about 60 to 70% in terms of my analysis in regards to the cost constraints that it's going to be a significant challenge for anybody below, which obviously we look at HBCUs, but anybody below the Power 5 conferences to be able to manage of having a football season. And I think what you're seeing is to the point where they're looking at just having conference games, which is the last domino to fall, if you would. And I think that's what's coming around.
Could it be a situation where could you play college football in the spring and make money?
Yeah, I think so for the FCS programs that there is a significant component because if you shift everything there, it gives you a chance to look at the classic games, which is significant revenue, which helps balance off the budget, the cost of having football. And then you move towards a warmer climate. All this is obviously conditioned in terms of what we're learning more of in terms of COVID-19. One, do we have a cure by then? No, that's probably a stretch in a lot of people in terms of the health profession opinion. But it gives you a chance to extend things. And if you can extend it further out, it gives you a chance to get more information. It gives you a chance to develop more models. It gives you a chance to look at more cost components in revenue aspects that help you in a situation where it could be viable to have football in the spring. And I think the component of that that really becomes challenging is can you get the NCAA to support it in terms of changing the rules for at least a year to move it. And the problem you have with that is, are they going to want to do that when the Power 5 schools look as if they're pushing forward to have football in fall? So are they going to literally go about this autonomy decision in such a way that you're going to let these classifications in football, that's FBS, FCS, Division II, and Division III for that matter, in the NCAA, as well as looking at it from the NAIA level? Are they going to allow them to separate and make decisions based on their need base in terms of what works with them from a financial aspect?
So the FBS schools do not want any part of spring football because their star players are not going to want to play that late in the year and prepare themselves for the NFL draft and potentially hurt their stock. We've seen what happens in these meaningless bowl games where star players year by year do not play. We would probably see that to a larger degree if there was an across-the-board spring football. For HBCU players, I don't think that's as big of a deal. But if things are mandated and forced to stay in the fall, is there any way to come out of the football season and not be in a financial hole?
I don't see it. I think it's going to be very challenging. We've seen the domino start to fall, which is the cancellation of the classic games. And when we look at the financial distribution of these classic games, you're talking about games that provide you anywhere from, at a minimum of $250K, usually more like $350K, upwards to $500,000, depending on some of the built-in clauses with the guarantee part of it. And then some of them have these attendance bonus tracks associated with it. And then you have to look at what are your expenses. So you're already talking about athletic programs and the ADs reducing their expenses side of it. So there's a chance that they can actually generate more profits in the net component of it. So when you look at that, and then you started seeing the games potentially being canceled with significant rivalry games, which are games such as the FAMU Southern game, which essentially are sellout games, which means you're talking about making anywhere from $250,000 to $450,000, upwards to even some of them possibly $600,000. So you're talking about $1.5 million. We haven't even talked about the cancellations of homecoming, as you mentioned, with North Carolina A&T and Winston-Salem State announcing today that they're canceling it. And you have to believe that that's something that's going to move throughout the HBCU framework, that you'll see those. So those are another events where essentially are sellouts, which means you're getting that, $250,000 to $500,000 in terms of the payday associated, because you add in parking, which may not go to athletics, but at least goes to the university in terms of their coffers, which helps supplement part of athletic program. So you're talking about making sizable hits. Let's just say in a scenario, you're talking about an athletic program that has a $10 million budget. If you're talking about taking $1 million, you're talking about 10%. You can look at any business model. You get them within 10% of what they're used to getting revenue. That significantly impacts them. You're talking about another $500,000 from other components with attendance, ticket sales, parking, right? Game guarantees. Now you're talking about another $500,000 to $1 million. So you're talking about 15 to 20%. It's really hard for any budget to be able to balance the budget in their books, taking those kind of hits. And so it just becomes a place where it's unsustainable for this period of time. So that's what these VPs of athletics and athletic directors are working with the commissioner of each of these leagues, along with their presidents and chancellors, are looking at, what is the viability from a business perspective? And you'll notice that the SWAC, I know from perspective, and I'm basically hearing this across the board, HBCUs, but specifically from the SWAC, they were out front with this. They were very upfront saying that their main thing that they were looking at were the safety of their students. Well, you started seeing the Power 5 schools, right, in some of the FBS programs bringing student athletes back, namely football players, right? And they were testing positive. And so most HBCUs were not even thinking about that, because they were saying, we want to foster this. Most of them are online for the summer, and they're like, where are we going to house them anyway? So they were at a slower rate to see what the return was. And they started maybe making some plans of what that may look like. But then when everybody started counting these different institutions with the number of college athletes that were testing positive, you quickly seen HBCUs back up and said, we told you from the beginning, we're looking at the safety of athletes. You have coaches out there being quite vocal in regards to saying, we said that we care about the students, what are these other programs doing? Let's show that we care about. And certainly the presidents are in line with that, and the chancellors, as well as the commissioners. So I'm seeing these decisions based on what they told us earlier, that they're really looking at the safety of these college athletes. And that's not necessarily saying the others aren't, but for them, it seems to be a higher priority. And then you add in the cost constraints, and it really becomes, in a lot of ways, not as challenging as a decision to say, hey, let's back up a little bit and let's start walking this down. And the classic games were games in a lot of ways that were outside of the institutional say anyway. Those were promoters, as you know.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say.
Three models for your classics. Go ahead.
That's what I was going to say. The first domino to fall were the promoters who immediately took their skin out of the game because they know if they don't get a crowd, look, that's what they're in it for.
Right. Their business model is about the attendance. They really don't get the television money, which is different than the Power Fives. And their sponsors are directly related to the attendance and maintaining it. So a lot of the money that they're able to generate and give back to the school is based on their attendance. So there's two issues with that. They are already saying that you're going to have to space people out in the stadium. So you're talking about cutting attendance from the get-go, whatever that looks like, right? 50%, some of them are saying even 30, 40% capacity. So you're talking about a game that has 50, 60%, 60,000, and you're cutting it to half. You're talking about half of your revenue disappearing. And so for a promoter, it doesn't fit for their model. So they had to back out. So you're starting to see them doing those maths. So as you said, you heard it from the Southern Heritage Classic. I heard in another interview with the promoter of the State Fair Classic, interviewing by Dr. Prince in his interview with him. And he was saying that there were questions whether the State Fair was going to be played. They could still do the game. He was open to, but he said he's looking to see what are the conditions and can they make it work? And does the institutions even want to have a season? So he's looking at different components of that. And so those are the things that are playing out. We just heard that at this point, the State Fair itself is saying they're moving forward, but these are all moving models. And we just are hearing across the state that all indicators are saying that the first phase of this has not ending, and that we're crescending and moving up, if not at a stutter play.
It's hard to sit here and plan for football and then watch the news and see in a lot of the southern states these COVID numbers going up. Like it just doesn't seem like the two things can coexist together.
Yeah, conjointly, they're just not matching up. And so when you really truly look at the science and you're listening at it just makes it really challenging to go through that framework of how do you make this work. And that's why, in a lot of ways, just playing conference games becomes probably the last decision. And eventually you look at the fact that you take this to spring. The other question that we need to start looking at that people don't want to hear is the current model for basketball means they essentially start in November, right? Mid-November. Well, football season is just halfway through. So we're already talking about, from the institutional sides, that they're looking at sending students home in Thanksgiving and whether they're going to do the final exam online or whether they're actually going to finish the semester in Thanksgiving. So where are you going to house these teams in December? Usually it's on campus, but if they're closing campus, how does that work for basketball? I've also been privy to understand that those basketball programs that have not signed contracts essentially before COVID hit, that now the Power 5 schools are starting to offer them, we'll pay for your travel, but instead of getting the $90,000, $80,000, $90,000, $100,000 check, they're offering them just $15,000. So yeah. I'm hearing AD say that's not worth it. We'll just stay at home and see if we can find a regional matchup. So that's even starting to some things that we're going to have to consider. Not only is this affecting basketball, but how is this going to start affecting the beginning of next basketball season? At the Division II level, I think you had an interview that you've heard about them in the NIA shortening basketball season by 2 or 3 games in and of itself, which means essentially they're looking at just playing conference games. So this is far from being over. We're just starting to see how this is going to really affect college sports at various levels.
Yeah, and we got a presidential election in November that could totally shift the way business is handled with public health. So there's just so many variables. on the table. Before we let you go, Doc, you had a chance to sit in on an interview earlier this week, I believe, with Dr. Dennis Thomas, the MEAC commissioner. What was your takeaway from that interview earlier this week?
Yes, I had a chance to sit on a show, Block Sports, where they were looking at with Mr. Jefferson. And I was joined by Luke Williams, individual that comes on the show here, and obviously, where we were interviewing Dr. Thomas, the commissioner of the MEAC. And it was fascinating as he started to opine about let's not be so short-sighted to close up the MEAC. And I thought some of the biggest takeaways from that conversation was the fact that he talked about that the NCAA guideline says that you need 7 conference teams, and they need to be together playing each other over an 8-year period. So currently they're at 9 teams. And so, they have a lot more space to go before that seems to be in jeopardy. And the fact that they're still playing for the MEAC Celebration Bowl and not an automatic bid to the playoffs in football, even if you think about it, the only sport that you're really looking at from a revenue perspective is the basketball one. So as long as you stay at over 7, it's something that they can slow walk down in a lot of ways and look at expansion and how to move forward. And he talked about that the presidents and chancellors of the MEAC do have a plan, that it will just take some time because it's not something where you can invite people in and show them the viability and a quick fix. That you really want to make sure you're taking in members that fit the culture of your organization. And so I think that's something to keep your eyes on watching in terms of what are the next steps for the MEAC. And we finally got an opportunity to see that they do have a plan. Now it's interesting to see what does that plan look like.
Yeah, I think it's safe to say that a lot of schools are just holding what they have right now. You're not looking to try to sell your board of trustees on big capital expenses to make a move. Definitely, when you start talking about teams moving up, moving side to side laterally might be a different situation. But so maybe
certainly
down.
When you're talking about conference churning, in that look is the fact that even if there's some MEAC schools that have some concerns in terms of the number of institutions in the MEAC, the other question you must ask yourself are where are teams able to go? So, for example, some people may say the Big South, or you may say the Colonial Athletic Association, or the NEC, or those schools that are interested in taking people in, because that means you're cutting into their budget unless you're bringing more revenue to them. Also, some of those teams like the CAA, they have 10 football members. The Big South just went into having their 9th member with Robert Morris. Do they want to play an 8-game schedule, or do they want to somehow split and go to a 10? Does it fit their model? And what does that look for basketball in terms of where they are with 11 or 12 members? So we also have to think about the fact that, yes, there legitimately may be some teams in the MEAC that are looking for options, which is what any good athletic director and president would do. But just because you're saying you're concerned where you are doesn't mean that you necessarily have somewhere you can go.
Hey, it's cheaper to keep her. we've heard that
all day long.
Well, look, I hear the music playing. We've got to go. He's Dr. Kenyatta Cavil from inside the HBCU Sports Lab, joining us from Houston, Texas. Doc, thanks a lot. Before we go, make sure out there that you click that subscribe button. So whenever we upload new content, you are the first to know about it, and you can check it out. Wherever you are right now, thank you for hanging out with HBCU Game Day.